I heard you haven't kissed a woman in 15 years. That's what an 18-year-old midwife's apprentice blurts out in the middle of a dusty frontier saloon. The room freezes. The mountain man she's talking to? He's a loner with a vow carved deep in grief, and a past tied to the land itself. But before the laughter dies, trouble rides in. Railroad men with papers claiming the town's only spring. To stop them, this unlikely pair must find proof buried in the hills. Proof that could save an entire community from going dry. Yet the law's been bought. Fires are set in the night, and chains are slapped on innocent hands. There's a truth hidden in old promises, one that could change everything. But can they uncover it before the railroad takes the water, and takes the town's soul with it? Every time I see your comments, I'm reminded how stories connect us across distances, backgrounds, and hearts. If values like respect, courage, and compassion still guide you, then you're part of this story too. The evening air hung heavy with tobacco smoke and whiskey fumes inside the Three Cedars Saloon. Lamplight cast a hazy glow over the rough-hewn tables where cowhands slouched, their voices growing louder with each drink. In the corner, a group of men had circled around Elias Crow, their eyes glinting with mischief. "Come on, Crow," one cowhand jeered, sloshing his drink. "Just one little kiss for old Rosie here, and this bottle's yours." He waved a half-full whiskey bottle, sniggering as the saloon girl batted her eyelashes. Elias stood silent, his weathered face impassive beneath the brim of his hat. His eyes, dark as pine bark, held a quiet dignity that seemed to make the cowhands even more determined to break him. Just then, the saloon doors swung open with a creak. Mercy June Abernathy stepped inside, her medicine satchel clutched close. She blinked, adjusting to the dim light, her round face flushed from the evening chill. "Well, if it ain't the little healer," another cowhand called out. "Come to patch up some broken hearts?" Mercy squared her shoulders, her eyes taking in the scene. Without hesitation, she marched over to the group, her voice clear and steady as she addressed Elias. "I heard you haven't kissed a woman in 15 years, she blurted out, her words cutting through the din of the saloon. The room fell silent. Even the piano player's fingers stilled on the keys. Elias turned to face Mercy, surprise flickering in his eyes before settling back into their usual calm. "That's right, Miss Abernathy," he said, tipping his hat. "Made a vow when my Aloha passed. Ain't broke it yet." The simple truth of his words hung in the air. The cowhands shifted uncomfortably, their earlier bravado fading in the face of Elias's quiet grief. Mercy nodded, her gaze steady. "A man of his word, then. Reckon that's worth more than any whiskey." The tension in the room eased, replaced by a grudging respect. Without a gun drawn or a fist thrown, Mercy's plain words had ended the cruelty. "Much obliged," Elias murmured, inclining his head towards Mercy. She offered a small smile in return. "Shall we step outside? The air in here's thick enough to choke a horse." Elias nodded, and they made their way to the saloon doors. As they stepped out into the cool night air, both took deep breaths, letting the crisp scent of pine wash away the stale saloon atmosphere. The street was quiet, save for the distant howl of a coyote. Lamplight from shop windows cast pools of yellow on the dusty road. Mercy was about to speak when the sound of hammering drew their attention. Down the street, a figure was nailing something to the town notice board. As they approached, Mercy recognized the polished boots and tailored suit of Silas Bell, the railroad land agent. "Evening, Mr. Bell," Mercy called out, her voice cautious. "What brings you out so late?" Silas turned, a practiced smile on his face. "Ah, Miss Abernathy. Mr. Crow. Just posting a little announcement from the Rocky and Pacific Railroad. Nothing to fret about." But as Mercy stepped closer to read the notice, her heart sank. The words, "eminent necessity," and "Willow Spring" jumped out at her, their meaning all too clear. "They can't do this," she whispered, her hands clenching into fists. "That spring's the lifeblood of this town, and the Ute. They've watered there for generations." Elias's face darkened as he read the notice. "Ain't right," he growled. "That water belongs to the people, not some Eastern Railroad man." The clinking of spurs announced the arrival of Sheriff Wade Pike. He ambled up, thumbs hooked in his belt. Now, he drawled. Let's not get all riled up. Railroad's got its rights, same as anyone. Rights? Mercy's voice rose. What about our rights? The rights of the Ute? The sheriff shrugged, his eyes sliding away from Mercy's accusing gaze. Law's the law, Miss Abernathy. Ain't much we can do about it. Pastor Amos Fitch hurried over, his worn Bible clutched to his chest. Perhaps we should pray on this, he suggested, his voice quavering. The Lord will show us the way. But even in the dim light, Mercy could see the doubt in the pastor's eyes. His words rang hollow, a plea for patience he didn't truly feel. Elias cleared his throat, drawing Mercy's attention. Miss Abernathy, he said quietly, there might be something. An old alcalde covenant, from before the territory changed hands. Mercy's eyes widened. A covenant? For the spring? Elias nodded. Marked by a token buried beneath a cairn. The promise stone, they called it, if we could find it. It could defend the town's claim, Mercy finished, hope kindling in her chest, and the Utes' right to winter watering. Sheriff Pike's eyes narrowed. Now let's not go stirring up trouble with old tales, he warned. Best to let sleeping dogs lie. But Mercy wasn't listening. Her mind was already racing with possibilities. Where is this cairn? She asked Elias eagerly. Before he could answer, the town clock began to chime, marking the late hour. Mercy startled, realizing how long they'd been talking. Oh my, she exclaimed. I should be getting home. Mama will be wondering where I've got to. Elias nodded, understanding in his eyes. Perhaps we could speak more after the morning service, he suggested. No need to rouse more gossip tonight. Mercy agreed, suddenly aware of the curious glances from passers-by. It wouldn't do to have tongues wagging about her spending too much time with the solitary mountain man, no matter how honorable his intentions. As they prepared to part ways, Mercy looked up at the star-studded sky. The vastness of it reminded her of the challenges they faced, but also of the endless possibilities. Thank you, Mr. Crow, she said softly, for standing up for what's right, and for telling me about the promise stone. Elias tipped his hat once more. You're the one who stood up first, Miss Abernathy. Reckon this town could use more folks like you. With a final nod, they went their separate ways, each lost in thought about the battle that lay ahead. As Mercy walked home, her steps were light despite the weight of the day's events. She had found an unexpected ally in Elias Crow, and perhaps, just perhaps, a way to save Willow Spring. The stars twinkled overhead, silent witnesses to the small acts of courage that had unfolded in Three Cedars that night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, hope glimmered as brightly as the promise stone they sought. The early Sunday bell rang out across Three Cedars, its clear tones cutting through the crisp morning air. Mercy June Abernathy stood at the window of her small clinic, watching as wagons clattered past on their way to church. The town was coming to life, shaking off the dust of Saturday night revelry. A soft moan from the back room pulled Mercy's attention away from the street. She hurried to check on her patient, a teamster's young son burning with fever. The boy's face was flushed, his brow damp with sweat. There, Mercy murmured, placing a cool cloth on his forehead. She reached for the willow bark tea she'd prepared earlier, its bitter scent filling the air. This will help bring down the fever. Can you drink a little for me? The child nodded weakly, and Mercy gently lifted his head, helping him sip the tea. As she tended to her patient, her mind wandered to the events of the previous night and the challenge that lay ahead. Once the boy had fallen into a fitful sleep, Mercy tidied up the clinic and stepped out onto Main Street. The last stragglers were hurrying towards the church, their Sunday best catching the morning light. As Mercy crossed the street, she noticed a small group of riders approaching from the south. Her heart quickened as she recognized the regal bearing of Auntie Safina, the respected Mwash Ute matriarch. Two younger riders flanked her, their expressions grave. Auntie Safina reined in her horse near the church steps, her dark eyes scanning the gathering townsfolk. When she spotted Mercy, she nodded in acknowledgement. Miss Abernathy, Safina said, her voice low and measured. "We've come to speak with your town leaders. The matter of Willow Spring cannot wait." Mercy moved closer, aware of the curious glances from those nearby. "Of course, Auntie Safina. What's happened?" The older woman's face tightened with worry. "If we lose access to Willow Spring, our winter camp will starve. The other water sources can't sustain us through the cold months." A chill ran down Mercy's spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. She knew the Ute relied on Willow Spring, but hearing the stark reality of their situation drove home the urgency of their mission. "We're working on a solution," Mercy said, her voice low. "There might be an old covenant that could help." Safina's eyebrows rose slightly. "A covenant? Tell me more." Before Mercy could respond, she spotted Elias Crow approaching. He tipped his hat to the Ute riders before turning to Mercy. "Miss Abernathy," he said quietly, "I've been thinking about what we discussed last night. I can confirm I saw the Promise Stone buried years ago. There were witnesses from both the town and the Ute camp." Mercy's heart leapt. "That's wonderful news, Mr. Crow. We need to tell Pastor Fitch right away." As if summoned by her words, Pastor Amos Fitch emerged from the church, his Bible tucked under one arm. He hesitated when he saw the gathering, but Mercy waved him over. "Pastor," she said, "we need your help. There might be some Spanish-language papers that could prove the existence of a covenant protecting Willow Spring. My late stepfather left them behind. Could you examine them?" The pastor's brow furrowed. "Well, I suppose I could take a look. My Spanish is a bit rusty, but I should be able to compare the seals at least. It will take several hours, though." Elias nodded. "That's all we can ask, Pastor, thank you." As the church bell rang out its final call, Elias turned to Mercy. "I propose we make a cautious ride to the ridge at first light tomorrow. We'll need someone who knows the old footpaths." "What about Jamie?" Mercy suggested. "The stable boy? He's of mixed heritage and knows this land better than most." Elias considered for a moment, then nodded. "Good thinking. I'll speak with him after the service." As the townspeople filed into the church, Mercy excused herself to finish her clinic rounds. She spent the afternoon checking on patients and preparing for the journey ahead. In her small quarters above the clinic, she packed biscuits, jerky, needles, and a jar of her strongest liniment. The day passed in a blur of activity and anticipation. As evening fell, Mercy joined the townsfolk for the evening hymn, her voice blending with theirs as they sang of hope and redemption. The words took on new meaning as she thought of the task that lay before them. Back in her room, Mercy trimmed her lantern wick and carefully knotted her bedroll. She double-checked her supplies, making sure everything was secure and easily accessible. Tomorrow's ride would be challenging, but the stakes were too high to leave anything to chance. Across town at the livery, Elias Crow worked by lamplight, tying down packs and checking his gear. His movements were methodical, born of years spent in the wilderness. As he worked, he thought of Alawa and the promise he'd made to her people. Finding the stone wasn't just about saving the town anymore. It was about honoring a vow that ran deeper than any railroad claim. Jamie, the young stable boy, watched Elias with wide eyes. "Mr. Crow," he ventured, "are you sure you want me along tomorrow? I don't want to slow you down." Elias paused in his work, turning to face the boy. "Jamie, you know those trails better than anyone. We need you. This isn't just about the town or the railroad. It's about doing right by all the people who call this land home." Jamie nodded, standing a little straighter. "I won't let you down, sir." As the town settled into nighttime quiet, an alliance had formed. Ute and settler, seasoned mountain man and eager youth, all united in a common cause. Mercy, Elias, Jamie, and the support of Auntie Safina. Each brought their own strengths to the quest for the Promised Stone. Tomorrow at dawn, they would set out to recover the proof that could save Willow Spring. The railroad's plans loomed over them like storm clouds on the horizon. But for now, hope burned as bright as the stars above Three Cedars. In her bed, Mercy said a silent prayer for their success. Across town, Elias checked his supplies one last time before settling down for the night. And in the Ute camp beyond the town's borders, Auntie Safina gazed at the moon. her heart heavy with the weight of her people's future. As three-seaters slept, the promised stone lay hidden, waiting to be rediscovered, a small token that held the power to change the course of their shared history. As Monday's dawn broke over Three Cedars, a thin layer of frost glittered on the corral rails. The air was crisp and sharp, carrying the promise of a clear day ahead. Mercy Abernathy stood by her steady bay mare, adjusting the saddle straps with gloved hands. Her breath formed small clouds in the chilly morning air as she double-checked her saddlebags, ensuring all her supplies were secure. Elias Crow emerged from the livery leading his own mount. His weathered face was set in lines of determination, eyes scanning the horizon as if already mapping out their journey. Behind him, young Jamie trotted out on a smaller pony, his excitement barely contained despite the early hour. Two Ute companions joined them, their horses stepping lightly across the frosted ground. They nodded respectfully to Elias and Mercy, their presence a silent reminder of the stakes involved in their mission. "Everyone ready?" Elias asked, his voice low and gravelly in the quiet morning. Mercy nodded, swinging herself up into the saddle. "As ready as we'll ever be, Mr. Crow." With a subtle gesture, Elias took the lead, guiding their small party out of town. They followed the creek eastward, the horses' hooves crunching softly on the frozen grass. The landscape slowly awakened around them, birds calling to one another in the trees and small animals scurrying through the underbrush. As the sun climbed higher, they reached a shallow ford in the creek. Elias held up a hand, bringing the group to a halt. "We'll cross here," he explained. "It'll be easier on the horses than the deeper parts downstream." One by one, they guided their mounts through the cold, clear water. Mercy felt the spray against her boots as her mare carefully picked her way across the stony bottom. Jamie grinned as his pony shook itself vigorously upon reaching the other side, sending droplets flying. The morning wore on, the frost giving way to dew as the sun warmed the land. By noon, the familiar shape of Elias's line shack came into view. It was a modest structure, just one room with a sturdy roof and stacked firewood along one wall. As they dismounted, Mercy caught the faint scent of old bacon grease wafting from inside. Elias pushed open the door, revealing a sparse but tidy interior. A tin sat on a small table, likely the source of the lingering aroma. "We'll rest here for a spell," Elias announced. "Get some food in us before we push on." Mercy set about brewing coffee in a battered pot she found on a shelf. The rich scent soon filled the small space, mingling with the wood smoke from the fire Jamie was stoking in the hearth. While Mercy tended to the coffee, Elias settled himself on a rough-hewn bench outside. He pulled out a worn leather stirrup and began mending it with practiced movements, his calloused fingers working the material with care. Jamie, having finished with the fire, grabbed an axe and set to chopping kindling. The rhythmic thunk of metal on wood joined the gentle bubbling of the coffee pot and the soft whickering of the horses. As they shared a simple meal of jerky and hard biscuits, one of the Ute riders approached Mercy. He gestured to the papers she had spread out on her lap. "Those words," he said, pointing to specific lines. "Trujillo Grant. Acequia. These are important." Mercy leaned forward, excitement flickering in her eyes. "You recognize them?" "What do they mean?" The rider shook his head slightly. "Not sure of all, but these terms, they matter for land and water rights. At winter camp, elders can translate better." Elias joined them, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Sounds like we might be on the right track. We'll make for the Ute camp next, see what more we can learn." With renewed purpose, they packed up and set out once more. The ride to the Ute winter camp was shorter, but the terrain grew more challenging. By the time they arrived, the sun was already dipping towards the western horizon. At the camp, they were greeted with cautious welcome. Elias and the Ute riders exchanged small pouches of tobacco, a gesture of respect and goodwill. In return, they were offered bowls of rich, hearty stew. As they ate, Mercy shared her papers with some of the elders. Their weathered faces creased in concentration as they pored over the Spanish text, murmuring to each other in their native tongue. Though Mercy couldn't understand their words, she could sense the growing excitement in their tones. With daylight fading fast, They bid farewell to the Ute camp and turned towards the ridge. The going was slow now, the horses picking their way carefully over increasingly rocky ground. Shadows lengthened around them and a chill crept back into the air. "We'll need to make camp soon," Elias called back to the others. "No use risking the horses in the dark." They found a suitable spot beneath a stand of cottonwoods, next to a small feeder stream that bubbled cheerfully over smooth stones. As Jamie and the Ute companions saw to the horses, Mercy and Elias gathered firewood and cleared a space for their bedrolls. Soon a merry fire crackled in the gathering dusk. They sat around it, sipping the last of their coffee and letting the warmth seep into their tired muscles. In the comfortable silence, broken only by the pop and hiss of the flames, Elias began to speak. 15 years ago, he said, his voice low and measured, "I made a vow to my wife, Alawa." Mercy looked up, surprised by this voluntary sharing. She remained quiet, sensing the weight of the moment. Elias continued, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "She was the bravest person I ever knew. Bridged 2 worlds, never backed down from what was right." He paused, swallowing hard. "When she died, I swore I'd never kiss another. It was my way of honoring her courage, her love." The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkening sky. Mercy listened without a hint of pity, only deep respect etching her features. "Thank you for sharing that, Mr. Crow," she said softly when he fell silent. "Alawa sounds like she was a remarkable woman." Elias nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "That she was, Miss Abernathy. That she was." As night fully settled around them, the haunting song of coyotes echoed across the land. Mercy wrapped her blanket tighter around her shoulders, gazing up at the star-studded sky. Quietly, she bowed her head in prayer. "Lord," she whispered, "guide our steps tomorrow. Whatever proof this land holds, help us find it, and give us the wisdom to use it rightly." She raised her head, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. Across the fire, she saw Elias watching her, a look of quiet approval in his eyes. They shared a nod of understanding before settling down for the night. As Mercy drifted off to sleep, lulled by the murmur of the stream and the occasional snort of the horses, she felt a deep sense of trust in her companions. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, under the vast canopy of stars, she felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. The sky lightened to a soft gray gold as Tuesday dawned, casting long shadows across the rocky ridge. Elias Crow led the way, his weathered boots finding purchase on the uneven terrain. Mercy June Abernathy followed close behind, her face set with determination. Jamie Runnels, the young stable boy, scrambled up with the energy of youth, while their Ute companions moved with quiet sureness. As they neared the top, Elias held up a hand, signaling the group to halt. "This is it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The cairn should be just ahead." They approached a pile of stones carefully stacked and weathered by years of sun, wind, and rain. Elias knelt beside it, running his hand over the rough surface. "Jamie," he called softly, "come give me a hand." The boy hurried over, eager to help. Together they began to dismantle the cairn, removing each stone with great care. The others watched in tense silence, hardly daring to breathe. As they worked, Mercy's eyes scanned the surrounding landscape. The valley stretched out below them, a patchwork of greens and browns. In the distance, she could just make out the glint of Willow Spring, the water that had brought them all here. "I think I see something," Jamie said suddenly, his voice tight with excitement. Elias reached into the gap they'd created, pulling out a bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. With steady hands, he carefully unfolded the protective layers. A collective gasp rose from the group as the contents were revealed. There, nestled in the cloth, lay a silver clasp, its surface dulled with age but still beautiful. Beside it was a folded parchment, the paper yellowed but intact. Elias gently unfolded the document, revealing the alcalde's seal pressed into red wax at the bottom. Below it, a series of signatures sprawled across the page. Mercy leaned in, her eyes wide. "What does it say?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias squinted at the faded script. It's a declaration, he said slowly, naming shared use of Willow Spring by the Acequia and for Ute wintering. He looked up, meeting Mercy's gaze. This is it, the Promised Stone. A wave of relief washed over Mercy. She quickly pulled a fresh piece of oilskin from her satchel. Here, she said, holding it out. We need to protect it. With great care, Elias wrapped the parchment and clasp in the new oilskin. He handed the bundle to Mercy, who hesitated for just a moment before tucking it securely against her corset stays. It'll be safe there, she said, patting her side. No one would dare look. Elias nodded, a hint of a smile touching his lips. Good thinking, Miss Abernathy. They carefully restacked the cairn, making sure it looked undisturbed. Then, with the precious document secured, they began their descent. The journey down was slow and treacherous. Loose rocks skittered under their feet, and more than once someone nearly lost their footing. Elias led the way, calling out warnings and offering a steadying hand when needed. By the time they reached level ground, the sun was high in the sky. They paused to rest and water the horses, sharing out the last of their provisions. We should make the winter camp by late afternoon, one of the Ute companions said, glancing at the sun's position. Elias nodded in agreement. Let's push on, he said. The sooner we get there, the better. The ride to the Ute winter camp seemed to stretch on endlessly. Mercy found herself constantly aware of the document pressed against her side, its presence both comforting and nerve-wracking. As predicted, they reached the camp as the afternoon light began to soften. The smell of cooking fires filled the air, and Mercy's stomach rumbled in response. Auntie Safina emerged from one of the lodges, her keen eyes taking in their tired but triumphant expressions. You found it? She asked, her voice calm but edged with hope. Mercy nodded, carefully extracting the oilskin package from her clothing. We did, she confirmed, handing it over with reverence. The Ute matriarch accepted the bundle, her weathered hands steady as she unwrapped it. The camp fell silent as she examined the seal and signatures, her brow furrowed in concentration. After what felt like an eternity, Auntie Safina looked up. A small smile graced her lips as she nodded. It is authentic, she declared. A collective sigh of relief swept through the gathered crowd. Elias's shoulders visibly relaxed, and Jamie let out a whoop of joy. Come, Auntie Safina said, gesturing towards one of the larger lodges. You must be hungry. We have venison stew. They followed her gratefully, the scent of rich, savory stew making their mouths water. As they ate, Auntie Safina spoke, her voice low and serious. This parchment is powerful, she said, but it must be used wisely. We should take both it and a translation to the county seat. Elias nodded, swallowing a mouthful of stew. Agreed, but when? The railroad won't wait long. The judge sits on Wednesdays, Auntie Safina replied. If you ride before dawn, you can make it in time. Mercy's eyes widened. Tomorrow? But that's so soon. Auntie Safina fixed her with a steady gaze. Time is not on our side, child. We must act quickly. As the implications sank in, a young woman approached their group. She spoke quietly to Auntie Safina, who nodded in approval. This is Nayeli, Auntie Safina introduced. She is fluent in Spanish and English. She has offered to ride with you at first light to translate on the trail. Mercy smiled warmly at Nayeli. Thank you, she said sincerely. Your help will be invaluable. As night fell, the camp prepared for sleep. Knowing the early start that awaited them, Elias, Mercy, Jamie, and their companions bedded down near the camp's warming fire. Mercy lay awake for a while, watching the flames dance and listening to the soft sounds of the sleeping camp. The weight of their mission pressed on her mind, but alongside it was a sense of hope. They had found the Promised Stone, the key to protecting Willow Spring. Now they just had to use it. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Mercy's last thought was a prayer for strength and wisdom for the journey ahead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, warmed by the fire and surrounded by allies, she allowed herself to rest. The sky was still dark when Mercy June Abernathy stirred from her restless sleep. Around her, the Ute winter camp was already coming to life, quiet voices and the soft clink of metal on metal filling the air. She sat up, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, and saw Elias Crow already tending to the horses. "Morning, Miss Abernathy," he said softly, nodding in her direction. "Best get ready. We've got a long ride ahead." Mercy nodded, quickly gathering her things. As she joined Elias by the horses, she noticed the animal's hooves were being wrapped in burlap. "What's that for?" she asked, curiosity overcoming her early morning grogginess. "Ice on the trail," Elias explained, his hands working deftly. "This'll give them better grip and protect their feet." Jamie Runnels appeared, leading 2 more horses. "All watered and ready to go," he reported, his young face a mix of excitement and nervousness. Auntie Safina approached, accompanied by a young woman Mercy recognized as her niece. "This is Nayeli," Auntie Safina introduced. "She will translate for us on the journey and at the courthouse." Mercy smiled warmly at Nayeli. "Thank you for coming with us. Your help will be invaluable." As the eastern sky began to lighten, they set out on the wagon road to the county seat. The pace was slow, the wagon creaking and swaying over the rough terrain. Mercy found herself grateful for Elias's foresight with the horses' hooves as they navigated icy patches. After they had been traveling for about an hour, Nayeli moved closer to Mercy. "Auntie Safina says we should look at your stepfather's papers," she said. "May I see them?" Mercy nodded, carefully extracting the documents from her satchel. She watched as Nayeli's eyes scanned the pages, occasionally comparing them to the alcalde parchment they had recovered. "The language is very similar," Nayeli said after a while. "These papers speak of the same grant, the same shared use of the spring. It strengthens our case." The journey stretched on, the sun climbing higher in the sky as they traveled. Mercy found herself alternating between nervous anticipation and a strange calm. They had the truth on their side, she reminded herself. Surely that would count for something. As they neared the county seat, Elias called for a brief stop. "We should make ourselves presentable," he said, brushing dust from his coat. "First impressions matter, even in a courtroom." They took a few minutes to straighten their clothes and smooth their hair. Mercy helped Jamie retie his neckerchief, while Auntie Safina adjusted her traditional dress with dignity. It was nearly noon when they finally arrived at the courthouse. The imposing building loomed before them, its stone steps leading up to heavy wooden doors. Mercy took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. Inside, they were directed to a courtroom where Judge Hollister was already seated. The room fell silent as they entered, all eyes turning to their unusual group. Mercy spotted Silas Bell seated near the front, his face a mask of cool confidence. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Hollister," the bailiff called out. As they stood, Mercy felt a hand on her arm. She looked up to see Elias giving her a reassuring nod. "We've got this," he whispered. Judge Hollister, a stern-looking man with graying hair, peered at them over his spectacles. "I understand we have a matter of some urgency regarding water rights," he said. "Who will speak first?" Auntie Safina stepped forward, her bearing regal despite the unfamiliar surroundings. "I will, Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and strong. For the next hour, Judge Hollister listened as each member of their group presented their testimony. Auntie Safina spoke eloquently of the long history of shared stewardship of Willow Spring, her words painting a vivid picture of cooperation between the town and the Ute people. Elias recounted the burial of the Promise Stone, his quiet voice carrying the weight of years of observation and respect for the land. Mercy presented the matching seals on the documents, her hand steady as she pointed out the similarities to the judge. Finally, Nayeli stood to read the Spanish text aloud, her clear voice filling the courtroom with the ancient words of the grant. As she finished, a hushed silence fell over the room. Judge Hollister leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed in thought. "Mr. Bell," he said at last, "do you have anything to add?" Silas Bell rose smoothly to his feet. "Your Honor," he began, his voice oozing charm, "while these stories are certainly interesting, They do not change the fact that the Rocky and Pacific Railroad has federal authority to claim land for the greater good of the nation. Eminent necessity, Your Honor. We have surveys and plans that clearly show the need for this water source. Do you have an original deed, Mr. Bell? Judge Hollister asked, his tone sharp. Bell hesitated for a moment. Not at this time, Your Honor, but— Then I've heard enough, Judge Hollister interrupted. He turned to face Mercy and her companions. While I cannot make a final ruling today, the evidence presented is compelling enough to warrant further investigation. I hereby grant a temporary injunction forbidding any diversion or alteration of Willow Spring until a full review can be conducted. A collective gasp went up from the group. Mercy felt her heart soar with hope and relief. Court is adjourned, Judge Hollister declared, bringing down his gavel with a resounding thud. As they filed out of the courtroom, Mercy couldn't help but notice the thunderous expression on Silas Bell's face. But even his obvious anger couldn't dampen the sense of victory that filled her. Outside the courthouse, Auntie Safina gathered them close. This is only the beginning, she cautioned. But it is a good beginning. We have bought time and shown the strength of our claim. Elias nodded in agreement. We should head back, he said, glancing at the sun's position. It's a long ride, and folks back home will be wanting news. They set out at a dignified pace, the mood considerably lighter than it had been that morning. As they traveled, Mercy found herself reflecting on all that had happened. They had done it. They had won their first legal victory against the railroad. The sun was setting by the time they reached the outskirts of Three Cedars. As they drew closer to town, Mercy heard a sound that made her heart leap. The church bell was ringing, its clear tones carrying through the evening air. They're celebrating, Jamie said, his voice filled with wonder. As they rode into town, they were met with cheers and applause. Pastor Fitch stepped forward, beaming with pride. Word came by telegraph, he explained. We've been waiting to welcome you home. Mercy dismounted, her legs stiff from the long ride. As she looked around at the smiling faces of her neighbors, she felt a wave of emotion wash over her. There's to be a community supper tomorrow evening, Pastor Fitch continued. Under the cottonwoods, a chance for everyone to hear the full story and to celebrate this victory together. As the news spread and plans were made, Mercy found herself swept up in the excitement. This was more than just a legal win. It was a moment of unity for their town, a reminder of what they could achieve when they stood together. As the night deepened and the celebrations began to wind down, Mercy caught Elias's eye. He tipped his hat to her, a small smile on his weathered face. In that moment, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a community, united in purpose and hope. The pre-dawn chill seeped through Mercy's thin blanket, rousing her from a fitful sleep. Something wasn't right. The air felt heavy, thick, with more than just the usual morning mist. As she blinked away the last traces of slumber, an acrid scent filled her nostrils. Wood smoke, far too strong for breakfast fires. Alarm surged through her veins. Mercy leapt from her cot, hastily pulling on her boots and shawl. She flung open the door of her small cabin, gasping as the smoky air hit her full force. In the dim light of early morning, she could see a flickering glow on the horizon. Her heart sank as she realized its source, Elias's line shack. Without a second thought, she began to run, her feet pounding against the hard-packed earth. As she drew closer, the heat became unbearable. Elias's modest dwelling was engulfed in flames, burning with an intensity that seemed unnatural. It was as if someone had stoked the fire of a blacksmith's forge, turning the simple structure into a raging inferno. "Elias," Mercy called out, her voice barely audible over the roar of the flames. "Jamie!" As if in answer to her cry, a figure emerged from the smoky haze. It was Jamie, stumbling towards her with an unsteady gait. His face was smudged with soot, and even in the flickering light, Mercy could see the dark bruises forming on his skin. "Jamie!" she exclaimed, rushing to support the boy. "What happened? Where's Elias?" Jamie coughed, his voice raspy as he spoke. "Sheriff Pike. He came with his deputies. They arrested Elias, said there was an old warrant. Manslaughter charge from years back. The boy's eyes were wide with fear and confusion. They took him away, Mercy. And then some men came. They ransacked the judge's office. Mercy felt as if the ground had dropped out from beneath her feet. The alcalde parchment, she whispered, dread settling in her stomach like a lead weight. Jamie, what about the parchment? The boy shook his head, wincing at the movement. It's gone, Mercy. They took it. For a moment, Mercy stood frozen, the magnitude of what had happened washing over her. Then, her training as a midwife's apprentice kicked in. We need to get you to the clinic, she said firmly, supporting Jamie as they turned away from the still-burning shack. Can you walk? Jamie nodded, though his face was pale beneath the soot. As they made their slow way back towards town, Mercy's mind raced. How could this have happened? They had been so close to securing protection for Willow Spring, and now the sun was just peeking over the horizon as they reached the outskirts of Three Cedars. Already, Mercy could see people gathering, pointing towards the column of smoke rising in the distance. She heard snatches of conversation as they passed. Worried whispers, accusations, fear. It's that big girl's meddling, she heard one woman hiss to another. Should have left well enough alone. Mercy felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her head high. There was no time for self-pity now. She had to find out what had happened to Elias and the parchment. After settling Jamie at the clinic with strict instructions to rest, Mercy hurried towards the courthouse. The building loomed before her, its windows dark and uninviting in the early morning light. To her surprise, the door was unlocked. Inside, she found the clerk already at his desk, looking harried and uncomfortable. Miss Abernathy, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. I suppose you're here about the incident. Mercy nodded, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. The alcalde parchment. It's missing. The clerk shifted in his seat. It was on the judge's desk last night. I saw it myself when I locked up. But this morning, he spread his hands helplessly. Gone, along with several other documents. Mercy closed her eyes, taking a deep breath to steady herself. And Elias Crow? I heard he was arrested. Sheriff Pike brought him in late last night, the clerk confirmed. Something about an old warrant resurfacing. I don't know the details. As Mercy left the courthouse, she felt the weight of stares upon her. Word was spreading quickly, and with it, a tide of rumor and speculation. She caught glimpses of Pastor Fitch across the street, but when she tried to catch his eye, he quickly looked away, hurrying into the church. The day wore on, each hour bringing fresh worries. Winter clouds rolled over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, their gray bulk promising snow. The planned community supper, which should have been a joyous celebration, now felt more like a wake. Despite the somber mood, people gathered under the cottonwoods as evening approached. Mercy moved among them, offering what comfort she could, but she felt the sting of accusation in many eyes. Some openly blamed her for stirring up trouble, while others simply avoided her gaze. As the first flakes of sleet began to fall, Mercy made her way back to the clinic. Jamie was awake, looking better but still clearly in pain. She tended to him gently, applying arnica to his bruises and a comfrey poultice to his ribs. You rest now, she told him softly. I'll check on you again in the morning. Outside, the sleet had turned to a steady icy rain. Mercy pulled her shawl tight around her shoulders as she hurried home. The streets were empty now, everyone having retreated indoors to escape the worsening weather. In the shelter of her small cabin, Mercy finally allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. She sank to her knees beside her cot, her hands clasped tightly together. Lord, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the patter of rain on the roof. I don't understand why this is happening. We were so close to making things right. Please, show me a clean path. Give me the strength to face whatever comes next. As she prayed, a plan began to form in her mind. Pastor Fitch's avoidance earlier in the day hadn't escaped her notice. He knew something, she was sure of it, and she intended to find out what. Rising from her knees, Mercy moved to the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could see the faint glow of the church lamps being lit. Soon the evening service would begin. She would wait until it was over, until the last parishioner had left and Pastor Fitch was alone in the church. Then she would confront him. Whatever he knew, whatever part he had played in this disaster, Mercy was determined to uncover the truth. With renewed purpose, she began to prepare for the confrontation ahead. She may have lost this battle, but Mercy Abernathy was far from defeated. For Elias, for Jamie, for the people of Three Cedars and the Ute, she would find a way to make this right. The church lamps cast a warm glow through the windows of Three Cedars' modest house of worship, a beacon of hope in the deepening night. Inside, the vestry hummed with hushed activity as Mrs. Greeley and the other ladies' aid women ushered Mercy Abernathy through the door. The scent of freshly baked bread filled the air, a comforting aroma that belied the tension evident in the women's faces. "Here now, child," Mrs. Greeley said, her voice a mixture of sternness and affection as she pressed a warm loaf into Mercy's hands. "You look like you haven't eaten a proper meal in days." Mercy accepted the bread gratefully, realizing only then how hungry she truly was. "Thank you, Mrs. Greeley," she murmured, tearing off a small piece and savoring its wholesome flavor. The other women bustled around, their skirts rustling as they arranged chairs and lit additional lamps. Their actions spoke of a nervous energy, a sense that something important was about to unfold. The door creaked open and Pastor Amos Fitch stepped into the vestry. His weathered face was drawn with worry, and he wrung his hat between his hands as if trying to wring out his very thoughts. His eyes darted around the room, finally settling on Mercy with a look of mingled guilt and apprehension. Mercy met his gaze steadily, her own eyes filled with a quiet determination. She didn't speak, but her silence seemed to weigh heavily on the pastor. I suppose you're all wondering why I've called this meeting," Pastor Fitch began, his voice faltering. Mrs. Greeley clicked her tongue impatiently. "Out with it, Amos. We've no time for hemming and hawing." The pastor nodded, swallowing hard. "I've done something. Something I'm not proud of," he admitted, his shoulders sagging. "I borrowed money from the railroad for the church roof. It was leaking something fierce and I didn't see any other way." A collective murmur rose from the gathered women, but Mercy remained silent, her gaze never wavering from Pastor Fitch's face. "Go on," she said softly when he hesitated. Pastor Fitch took a deep breath. "Silas Bell. He came to me yesterday, said he needed to glance at some files in the church office. He asked for the key." The pastor's voice dropped to a whisper, "And I gave it to him." A heavy silence fell over the room. Mercy closed her eyes briefly, understanding dawning on her face. "The alcalde parchment," she said. "You think he took it?" Pastor Fitch nodded miserably. "I fear I've abetted theft. I didn't think." "No," Mrs. Greeley said sharply. "You didn't think. But what's done is done. The question now is, what do we do about it?" As if in answer to her question, the vestry door opened once more. Auntie Safina stepped inside, her presence commanding immediate respect. She surveyed the room, taking in the pastor's dejected posture and the worried faces of the women. "We counter this theft with truth," Auntie Safina said, her voice calm but filled with purpose. "There are those who remember the Essequia vote, who know the rightful use of Willow Spring. We gather their testimonies." Mercy straightened, hope kindling in her eyes. "Signed statements," she said. "If we can't produce the parchment, we bring the living memory of the agreement." Auntie Safina nodded approvingly. "We ride through the night," she continued. "Visit every household that might remember. Gather their words by dawn." The women of the Ladies' Aid exchanged glances, then began to nod with growing determination. Mrs. Greeley stepped forward, already taking charge. "We'll need to split up, cover more ground. Who has paper? Ink?" "I've got writing supplies in my saddlebag," one woman offered. "There are spare lanterns in the church storeroom," another added. Pastor Fitch, seeming to draw strength from the women's resolve, spoke up. I can draw up a simple form, something for folks to sign, stating what they remember about the agreement. Mercy nodded encouragingly. That's good, Pastor. It'll help. As the group began to organize, assigning routes and gathering supplies, 2 Ute riders appeared at the vestry door. They spoke quietly with Auntie Safina, who turned to address the others. These men have volunteered to accompany any older settlers who might need assistance, she explained. They know the lands well and can guide them safely through the night. Mrs. Greeley clapped her hands, bringing order to the bustling activity. Right then, let's pair up and be on our way. We've not a moment to lose. As midnight approached, the churchyard filled with the soft sounds of horses being readied and hushed conversations as final plans were made. A light snow had begun to fall, dusting the ground with a fine powder that crunched underfoot. Pairs of riders began to depart, heading off in different directions under the spitting snow. Lanterns swung from saddle horns, bobbing points of light that slowly dispersed into the darkness. Mercy found herself astride her steady bay mare once more, Mrs. Greeley mounted on a placid plow horse beside her. They were to head south toward the Morales homestead, then circle back through a series of small farms and ranches by morning. Ready, child? Mrs. Greeley asked, adjusting her shawl against the chill. Mercy nodded, her face set with determination. Ready, Mrs. Greeley. Let's bring back the truth. As they urged their horses forward, Mercy cast one last glance over her shoulder. She saw Pastor Fitch standing in the church doorway, his face a mixture of regret and hope. Auntie Safina stood beside him, her presence seeming to lend him strength. The night ahead would be long and cold, but Mercy felt a warmth in her heart. This was more than just a quest to save Willow Spring or free Elias. It was a coming together of town and camp, a united stand against injustice. As their horses picked their way down the snowy street, Mercy whispered a quiet prayer. Lord, guide our path tonight. Let truth prevail. With that, she and Mrs. Greeley disappeared into the swirling snow, the first step taken on their night-long journey to gather the memories that could save their home. The snow fell in soft, silent flakes as Mercy urged her horse through the pre-dawn darkness. Her breath puffed out in white clouds, and she pulled her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders. The visits to the Morales and Carson homesteads had yielded 2 strong testimonies, but they'd used up nearly all the paper Mrs. Greeley had brought. We need to make a quick stop at my clinic, Mercy said, her voice barely audible above the crunch of hooves on snow. I've got more writing supplies there. Mrs. Greeley nodded, her face half hidden by her scarf. Good thinking, child. We can't afford to run out now. They guided their horses down the silent main street of 3 Cedars, the buildings looming like dark shadows in the gray light. Mercy dismounted in front of her small clinic, fumbling with cold fingers to unlock the door. Inside, she lit a lamp and quickly gathered sheets of paper from her desk. As she turned to leave, her eyes fell on her stepfather's old trunk in the corner. Something tugged at her memory. Hadn't he mentioned keeping important papers there? Just a moment more, she called to Mrs. Greeley, who waited patiently outside. Mercy knelt beside the trunk, lifting the heavy lid. She rummaged through folders and loose papers, searching for anything that might help their cause. Her hand brushed against a sealed packet, tucked away at the bottom. Curious, she pulled it out and held it up to the lamplight. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the faded writing on the outside. Marriage certificate, Elena Abernathy and Miguel Trujillo. With trembling fingers, Mercy broke the seal and unfolded the document. There, in faded ink but still clearly legible, was her mother's marriage certificate to Miguel Trujillo, heir to the very land grant they were fighting to protect. And at the bottom, unmistakable, was the stamp of the same alcalde who had signed the Willow Spring Agreement. Mercy's mind raced. This certificate proved her legal kinship to the Trujillo grant. It gave her standing in the eyes of the law, a voice that couldn't be easily dismissed. She quickly copied the essential details onto a spare sheet of paper, then carefully folded the original and tucked it into an inside pocket of her coat. Her heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and trepidation as she gathered the rest of the supplies and hurried back outside. Everything all right? Mrs. Greeley asked, noting Mercy's flushed cheeks. Mercy nodded, mounting her horse. Yes, ma'am, I just found something important. But first, I need to make one more stop. Without waiting for a response, Mercy turned her horse toward the jail. The street was beginning to lighten as dawn approached, casting long shadows across the fresh snow. She dismounted in front of the squat building, motioning for Mrs. Greeley to wait. I won't be long, she promised, then stepped inside. The deputy on duty looked up in surprise as Mercy entered. Miss Abernathy? What brings you here at this hour? I need to speak with Elias Crow, Mercy said firmly. It's important. The deputy hesitated, then shrugged. All right, but make it quick. He led her to the cell where Elias was being held. The mountain man sat on the narrow cot, a small prayer book open in his hands. He looked up as Mercy approached, his eyes widening in surprise. Mercy? What are you doing here? She gripped the cold iron bars, her voice low but urgent. Elias, I found something. My mother's marriage certificate to Miguel Trujillo. It bears the same alcalde's stamp as the Willow Spring Agreement. Elias stood slowly, moving closer to the bars. That gives you legal kinship to the grant, he said, understanding dawning in his eyes. Mercy nodded. And standing in court. I'm going to present it at the next hearing, along with all the testimonies we're gathering. Elias's weathered hand reached through the bars, grasping the prayer book Jamie had brought him earlier. His eyes met Mercy's, filled with a mix of hope and caution. Hold fast to mercy, not rage, he said softly. This fight ain't just about the law. It's about what's right for all of us, town and camp alike. Mercy felt a lump form in her throat. She reached out, her fingers brushing Elias's for just a moment. I promise, she whispered. I'll use this to bring justice, not vengeance. The deputy cleared his throat, signaling that time was up. Mercy stepped back, her eyes still locked with Elias's. I'll be back soon, she promised. We'll set this right. As she stepped back out into the gray morning light, the snow was falling more heavily. Mrs. Greeley looked at her questioningly, but Mercy just shook her head. Later, she said. We've got more testimonies to gather. Mercy carefully wrapped the precious packet containing her mother's marriage certificate in a piece of oilskin, securing it inside her coat. Then, with a nod to Mrs. Greeley, she swung back into her saddle. They rode out of town, the snow muffling the sound of their horses' hooves. Mercy's mind was racing, filled with the possibilities this new discovery presented. But she forced herself to focus on the task at hand, gathering more signatures to support their cause. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold, Mercy and Mrs. Greeley had visited 3 more homesteads. Each time they were met with bleary-eyed but determined settlers, eager to add their names to the growing list of testimonies. Old Man Johnson, his arthritis-gnarled hands shaking slightly as he signed, spoke of the day the Acequia agreement was made. I was just a boy, he said, but I remember clear as day how proud folks were. Said it was a new way of doing things, working together instead of fighting. At the widow Hernandez's small farm, they found not only a signature but a faded copy of the original Acequia charter. My Eduardo, God rest him, he kept everything, the widow said, pressing the document into Mercy's hands. Use it well, Nina. Their final stop before sunrise was the blacksmith's cottage on the edge of town. Despite the early hour, Hank Granger was already at his forge, the ring of his hammer echoing in the crisp morning air. He paused in his work to add his name to their list, his usually gruff demeanor softened by the gravity of the situation. You tell him, Miss Mercy, he said as they prepared to leave. Tell him that Willow Spring belongs to all of us, always has, always will. As they turned their horses back toward town, the sun finally broke free of the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow-covered fields. Mercy felt a fierce pride well up in her chest as she thought of all the people, town and camp alike, who had come together in this common cause. She patted the pocket where her mother's marriage certificate rested, a tangible link to the past that now held the key to their future. With this proof of her standing and the testimonies they had gathered, Mercy felt a glimmer of hope. They had a fighting chance to save Willow Spring and preserve the delicate balance that had sustained their community for generations. As they rode, Mrs. Greeley broke the comfortable silence. "You found something important in that trunk, didn't you?" she asked, her voice gentle but knowing. Mercy nodded, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. "I did," she said softly. "Something that might change everything." Mrs. Greeley reached over and patted Mercy's arm. "Well then, child, it seems we've got quite a story to tell when we get back to town." With that, they urged their tired horses onward, the rising sun at their backs and the promise of a new day, and perhaps a brighter future, stretching out before them. As Friday's mid-morning sun struggled to pierce the thick clouds, riders began to straggle back into three-seaters. Their faces were ruddy from the biting cold, fingers numb despite thick gloves. Each carried a precious cargo, affidavits from townsfolk and settlers testifying to the long-standing agreement about Willow Spring. Mercy and Mrs. Greeley were among the last to return, their horses' hooves crunching through the fresh snow. They dismounted stiffly in front of the church, where Pastor Fitch stood waiting, his breath visible in the frigid air. "How many?" he asked anxiously, helping Mrs. Greeley down from her horse. 17, Mercy replied, her voice hoarse from hours of explaining their mission to drowsy homesteaders. "And the widow Hernandez gave us a copy of the original Acequia Charter." The pastor's eyes widened. "Praise be," he murmured. "That could make all the difference." As they entered the church, stomping snow from their boots, they found the other riders gathered around the pot-bellied stove. Jamie was there too, his young face pinched with worry as he nursed a steaming cup of coffee. Mrs. Greeley, ever practical, spoke up as she warmed her hands. "We need to protect these witnesses," she said firmly. "Sheriff Pike's already shown he's not above underhanded tactics." Pastor Fitch nodded grimly. "What do you suggest?" "Duplicate," Mrs. Greeley replied. "We'll make copies of each affidavit. Keep one set here at the church and send another with a trusted rider to Fort Garland for safekeeping." Mercy felt a surge of admiration for the older woman's foresight. "That's a fine idea, Mrs. Greeley," she said. "And speaking of Fort Garland, I think we need to reach out to the reservation agency clerk there." She explained her reasoning as the others listened intently. "If we can get official confirmation that the Ute winter camp has historically watered at Willow Spring, it'll add even more weight to our case." Jamie perked up at this. "I can ride to Fort Garland," he offered eagerly. "I know the trails even in this weather." Mercy shook her head, touched by the boy's bravery but unwilling to risk him in the treacherous conditions. "Thank you, Jamie, but I've got a safer idea. We'll send a telegram." With the group's agreement, Mercy set to work drafting a short message. Her pencil scratched across the paper as she chose her words carefully. "To Reservation Agency Clerk, Fort Garland stop request. Urgent confirmation of Ute Winter Camp historical use of Willow Spring for watering stop. Reply collect, stop hearing, Sunday stop." Pastor Fitch read over the telegram and nodded his approval. "Short and to the point," he said. "Let's hope it reaches him in time." As the afternoon wore on, the church became a hive of activity. Volunteers worked diligently to create duplicate copies of each affidavit, their pens scratching in unison. Mercy made her way to the telegraph office, praying the lines hadn't been brought down by the storm. To her relief, the operator assured her the message would go through. "Might take a bit longer than usual," he warned, "but I'll make sure it gets there." Mercy thanked him and headed back to the church, pausing to scan the street. The snow had let up briefly, and she could see Sheriff Pike prowling near the saloon, his eyes narrowed suspiciously. She quickened her pace, not wanting to risk a confrontation. Back at the church, she found Jamie pacing nervously by the window. "Any word yet?" he asked as soon as she entered. Mercy shook her head. "It'll take time, Jamie. We just have to be patient." As if in answer to her words, the door burst open, admitting a gust of cold air and the breathless telegraph operator. "Miss Abernathy," he called. "Got a reply for you." Mercy's heart leapt as she took the paper from his outstretched hand. She read it aloud to the anxious group. Received request stop can bring ledger excerpts Sunday if permitted by captain. Stop will do utmost to attend hearing. Stop. A collective sigh of relief filled the church. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was hope, another piece of evidence to support their cause. As the afternoon light began to fade, Judge Hollister arrived at the church. His face was grave as he surveyed the bustling scene. "I've been giving this matter a great deal of thought," he announced, silencing the room. "After the incident with the alcalde parchment, I believe we need to take extra precautions." Mercy felt her stomach clench, fearing the judge might postpone the hearing. But his next words surprised her. "I'm setting a public hearing here in the church on Sunday morning," Judge Hollister continued. "It's the largest building in town, and holding it here will ensure safety and transparency for all involved." Pastor Fitch stepped forward, nodding solemnly. "We'd be honored to host, Your Honor. You can count on our full cooperation." The judge's decision sent a ripple of excitement through the gathered townsfolk. It was a bold move, one that showed he was taking their cause seriously. As the meeting broke up, Mercy volunteered to post notice of the hearing at the Mercantile. She bundled up against the returning chill and made her way down the street, the fresh snow crunching under her boots. Inside the store, Mr. Hawkins, the owner, greeted her with a worried frown. "Any news, Miss Mercy?" he asked as she explained her errand. "We're having a public hearing on Sunday," she told him, her voice low but firm. "Here in the church. Judge Hollister wants to make sure everything's out in the open this time." Mr. Hawkins nodded approvingly as he helped her tack the notice to the bulletin board. "About time," he muttered. "Whole town's been on edge since this railroad business started." As Mercy turned to leave, she caught sight of Sheriff Pike through the store's front window. He was standing across the street, watching her with narrowed eyes. She lifted her chin defiantly and strode out into the swirling snow. Back at the church, Mercy found Mrs. Greeley organizing the last of the affidavit copies. The older woman looked up as she entered, a knowing smile on her face. "Well, child," she said softly, "looks like we've got quite a story to tell on Sunday." Mercy nodded, feeling a mix of determination and nervous anticipation settle in her chest. They had gathered their evidence, secured community support, and even engaged the reservation agency clerk. Now, all that remained was to present their case and pray for justice. As the snow resumed its steady fall outside, Mercy allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Sunday's hearing would determine not just the fate of Willow Spring, but the very future of Three Cedars and the delicate balance between town and camp. With a silent prayer, she turned her attention back to the task at hand, ready to face whatever challenges the coming days might bring. As the sun peeked over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, the Three Cedars Church stood as a beacon of hope and justice. The old wooden building creaked and groaned as it filled with people from all walks of life. Ranchers in their Sunday best shuffled in alongside Ute elders wrapped in colorful blankets. Townsfolk, their faces etched with concern and curiosity, found seats wherever they could. Inside, the pot-bellied stove roared, its warmth a stark contrast to the chill that had settled over the town in recent days. The air was thick with tension, and the scent of coffee brewing in the back. Mercy June Abernathy sat near the front, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She watched as Judge Hollister took his place at the pulpit, which had been temporarily converted into a makeshift bench. The judge's face was stern, his eyes scanning the packed pews. A murmur rippled through the crowd as the door swung open, admitting a gust of cold air and two figures in uniform. The agency clerk from Fort Garland had arrived, accompanied by a sergeant whose presence lent an air of official authority to the proceedings. In the clerk's arms was a canvas-wrapped bundle that Mercy knew must be the ledger, their potential lifeline. As the newcomers made their way down the aisle, Mercy caught sight of Pastor Fitch near the side door. His face was ashen, his usual warm demeanor replaced by a look of deep shame. In his trembling hands, he clutched a familiar oilskin packet. Judge Hollister called the hearing to order, his gavel echoing through the hushed church. "We are gathered here today," he began, his voice grave, "to address the matter of Willow Spring and its rightful use." Before testimonies could begin, Pastor Fitch stepped forward, his shoulders slumped. Your Honor, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I have a confession to make. All eyes turned to the pastor as he held out the oilskin packet. This is the stolen parchment, he said, his voice gaining strength. I found it stuffed in my desk after Mr. Bell's men abandoned it there. A collective gasp rose from the congregation. Mercy felt her heart racing as the pastor continued. I was a coward, Fitch admitted, his eyes brimming with tears. I should have come forward immediately, but fear got the better of me. I can only beg for forgiveness and pray that my moral failing hasn't caused irreparable harm. Judge Hollister accepted the parchment with a grim nod. Your honesty, though delayed, is noted, Pastor, he said. Please take your seat. As Fitch retreated, visibly shaken, the judge turned to the agency clerk. Sir, I understand you have information to share with us? The clerk nodded, stepping forward with his canvas-wrapped ledger. Yes, Your Honor. I must clarify that Army regulations prevent me from commenting on matters of law. However, I am permitted to read historical entries from our official records. With that, he carefully unwrapped the ledger and began to read in a clear, steady voice. Annual winter watering at Willow Spring by Ute Camp, he intoned, listing dates stretching back decades. Each entry was a nail in the coffin of the railroad's claim, a testament to the long-standing use of the spring by both town and tribe. As the clerk read, Mercy noticed Silas Bell shifting uncomfortably in his seat. The railroad agent's face was a mask of barely contained frustration. When the clerk finished, Judge Hollister called for witness testimonies. Jamie, the young stable boy, was among the first to step forward. Despite his youth, he stood tall, his voice steady as he recounted nights spent with Elias tending stock at Willow Spring. Mr. Crow taught me how to listen for coyotes, Jamie said, his eyes bright with the memory. He showed me how to tell if the water was running clear, even in the dark. We'd go out there in all kinds of weather, making sure the animals had what they needed. Throughout Jamie's testimony, Silas Bell's objections rang out like gunshots. Hearsay, he shouted. Irrelevant. But each time, Judge Hollister's gavel came down hard, silencing the agent's protests. Mr. Bell, the judge warned after the third interruption, I remind you that this is a public hearing, not a formal trial. All relevant testimonies will be heard. As the morning wore on, more witnesses came forward. Ranchers spoke of generations relying on the spring. Ute elders shared stories passed down through the years, tales of peace and shared resources. Each testimony built upon the last, weaving a tapestry of community and cooperation that stretched back further than any railroad claim. The stolen parchment, now safely in the judge's possession, seemed to take on new life with each corroborating account. What had once been a fragile piece of evidence was becoming an unshakable foundation for the town's case. As noon approached, the air in the church grew thick with anticipation. Judge Hollister called for a brief recess before final statements, and the congregation buzzed with hushed conversations. Mercy stood, stretching her stiff legs, when a commotion at the back of the church caught her attention. Her heart nearly stopped as she saw Sheriff Pike marching down the aisle, a shackled Elias Crow in tow. The room fell silent, tension crackling like lightning before a storm. Elias's face was stoic, but Mercy could see the weariness in his eyes. Sheriff Pike's expression was a mix of frustration and grim determination. Reckon there's a man's way to settle this, Pike muttered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. His hand rested meaningfully on his holstered pistol. Fear rippled through the crowd. Mercy felt her muscles tense, ready to spring into action, though she didn't know what she could do. The delicate balance they had been building all morning seemed on the verge of shattering. Judge Hollister's gavel cracked like thunder, startling everyone. Sheriff Pike, he boomed, what is the meaning of this interruption? Pike's jaw clenched. Bringing the prisoner for his hearing, Your Honor, he said, a hint of defiance in his tone. Mr. Crow's presence was neither requested nor required at this time, the judge replied sharply. Remove those shackles immediately. For a moment, it seemed Pike might refuse, but under the combined weight of the judge's glare and the watchful eyes of the army sergeant, he relented. With obvious reluctance, he unlocked Elias's restraints. Elias rubbed his wrists, his eyes scanning the room until they found Mercy's. She saw a flicker of hope there, quickly masked by his usual stoic expression. "Mr. Crow," Judge Hollister said, his tone softening slightly, "you're welcome to stay if you wish. We're about to reconvene for final statements." Elias nodded silently, taking a seat in the back row. Sheriff Pike, looking thoroughly chastened, retreated to stand by the door. As the congregation settled back into their seats, Mercy felt a mix of emotions coursing through her. They had come so far, gathered so much evidence. The federal ledger entries, the community testimonies, even the return of the stolen parchment, all of it pointed toward justice for both town and tribe. Yet the sheriff's actions were a stark reminder of the forces still arrayed against them. As Judge Hollister called the hearing back to order, Mercy silently prayed that the weight of truth would be enough to tip the scales in their favor. As the congregation settled back into their seats, Sheriff Pike's voice cut through the hushed whispers. "Enough of this lawyer talk," he growled, his hand resting on his holstered pistol. "Let's settle this like men." The church fell silent, tension crackling in the air. Pike's eyes locked onto Elias, who stood quietly at the back of the room. "What do you say, Crow? A fair fight in the street right now. Winner takes all." Elias met Pike's gaze steadily, his voice low but firm. "No, Sheriff. I won't be party to more violence. This is a matter for the law, not guns." Pike's face twisted with anger, but before he could respond, Mercy stood up. Her heart hammered in her chest, but her voice rang out clear and strong. "There's no need for a duel," she declared, stepping into the aisle between Pike and Elias. "We have all the proof we need right here." With trembling hands, Mercy reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded document. She held it up for all to see. "This is my mother's marriage certificate to the Trujillo heir," she announced. "It bears the same alcalde seal as the parchment we found." A murmur rippled through the congregation as Mercy unfolded the certificate. She turned to face Judge Hollister, her chin held high. "Your Honor, this certificate proves my legal kinship to the Trujillo grant. I have standing in this case." Judge Hollister leaned forward, his eyes sharp with interest. "Bring that here, Miss Abernathy," he ordered. Mercy walked to the front of the church, aware of every eye upon her. She handed the certificate to the judge, who examined it closely, comparing the seal to the one on the recovered parchment. After a long moment, Judge Hollister looked up. "This appears to be genuine," he said. "Miss Abernathy does indeed have legal standing in this matter." Silas Bell, the railroad agent, leapt to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This document wasn't presented earlier. It can't be admissible now." "Mr. Bell," the judge replied sternly, "I remind you again that this is not a formal trial. All relevant evidence will be considered." As Bell sank back into his seat, his face pale, Judge Hollister turned his attention to a stack of papers on the makeshift bench before him. "In the light of this new evidence," he said, "I've reviewed past territorial rulings on the skirmish that led to the manslaughter charge against Mr. Crow." The room held its breath as the judge continued. "Based on these records, I find that the incident was long ago adjudicated as self-defense." He looked directly at Sheriff Pike. "The charge is dismissed, effective immediately." A collective gasp echoed through the church. Elias closed his eyes briefly, relief visible on his weathered face. But Judge Hollister wasn't finished. His gaze hardened as he focused on Sheriff Pike. "Furthermore," he said, his voice sharp with authority, "Sheriff Pike, your actions today and throughout this matter suggest collusion and contempt for this court. You are hereby removed from your duties pending a full investigation." Pike's face flushed red with anger. He opened his mouth to protest, but the judge cut him off with a bang of his gavel. "Sergeant," he called to the army man, "please escort Mr. Pike from the premises." As the disgraced sheriff was led away, the tension in the room began to dissipate. The congregation exhaled collectively, the sound of relief palpable in the air. Mercy glanced over at Auntie Safina, the respected Ute matriarch. The older woman met her gaze and nodded once, satisfaction clear in her eyes. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about the significance of what had just transpired. Judge Hollister cleared his throat, regaining everyone's attention. In light of the evidence presented today, including the federal ledger entries, community testimonies, and the recovered parchment, I need time to draft appropriate orders. He looked around the room, his expression serious. This court will recess for 1 hour. We will reconvene at that time for my final ruling. With another bang of his gavel, the judge stood and made his way to the pastor's study, where he could work in privacy. As the crowd began to stir, talking excitedly amongst themselves, Elias made his way slowly to the front of the church. Free of the shackles that had bound him earlier, he moved with a quiet dignity. Without a word, he sat down in the front pew, his eyes fixed on the altar ahead. Mercy watched him for a moment, her heart full of emotions she couldn't quite name. Then, shaking herself, she turned to the task at hand. Taking a seat at a small table near the pulpit, she began carefully copying names from the various testimonies and documents into a formal record. The scratch of her pen on paper filled the air, a steady counterpoint to the low murmur of voices around her. As she worked, Mercy could feel the weight of what they had accomplished settling over her. They weren't out of the woods yet. The judge's final ruling was still to come, but they had made real progress. The stolen parchment had been returned. The federal ledger had confirmed the Utes' historical use of Willow Spring. The community had come together to provide testimony, and her own unexpected connection to the Trujillo grant had provided the final piece of the puzzle. Mercy glanced up from her work, her eyes finding Elias again. He sat motionless, his expression unreadable. But as she watched, she saw his shoulders relax slightly, as if some great burden had finally been lifted. With renewed determination, Mercy bent back over her task. There was still work to be done, names to be recorded, a history to be preserved. And in less than an hour, they would learn the judge's decision, a ruling that could shape the future of Three Cedars and the Ute winter camp for generations to come. As the minutes ticked by, the church hummed with anticipation. The fate of Willow Spring hung in the balance, and with it, the delicate harmony between town and tribe that had endured for so long. Whatever the outcome, Mercy knew that this day would be remembered as a turning point in their shared history. The church bells chimed 3 o'clock as the congregation filed back into the sanctuary. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden pews. Judge Hollister made his way to the front, his robes rustling softly as he took his place behind the makeshift bench. A hush fell over the room as the judge cleared his throat. After careful consideration of all the evidence presented, he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the church. I have reached a decision regarding the matter of Willow Spring. Mercy sat up straighter, her heart pounding. She could feel the tension radiating from those around her, ranchers, townsfolk, and Ute elders alike, all waiting with bated breath. It is clear, Judge Hollister continued, that Willow Spring has long been a shared resource, vital to both the town of Three Cedars and the Ute winter camp. To preserve this delicate balance and ensure fair use for all parties, I hereby establish a water trust. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Mercy glanced at Elias, who sat perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the judge. This trust, the judge explained, will be based on co-stewardship between the Acequia Association and Auntie Safina's band. It will be supervised by a rotating board, with members from both communities. Enforcement of the trust's rules and regulations will rest with this court. Auntie Safina nodded solemnly, her weathered face showing a glimmer of satisfaction. Beside her, several ranchers exchanged cautious but approving looks. Judge Hollister paused, then smiled slightly. To assist in the day-to-day management of this trust, I am appointing a junior water rider. He beckoned to Jamie, who stood nervously. Young man, step forward. Jamie approached the bench, his eyes wide with surprise and a touch of fear. Do you, Jamie Runnels, swear to faithfully patrol the gates, record water flows, and report any irregularities to the board? The judge asked. Jamie straightened his shoulders. I do, Your Honor, he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. Then I hereby swear you in as junior water rider for the Willow Spring Water Trust. Judge Hollister declared. May you serve with honor and diligence. A smattering of applause broke out, led by Elias's quiet but firm clapping. Jamie's face flushed with pride as he returned to his seat. The judge then turned to the agency clerk, who had been observing the proceedings with keen interest. Sir, can you confirm that this arrangement complies with reservation rules? The clerk stood, adjusting his spectacles. Yes, Your Honor. Based on the terms you've outlined, I can state that this trust aligns with our regulations. The Army will have no cause to interfere with its operation. A collective sigh of relief seemed to sweep through the room. One potential obstacle had been neatly avoided. As the clerk sat down, Pastor Fitch rose slowly to his feet. His face was pale, but his voice was clear as he addressed the congregation. Before we conclude, he said, I must speak. All eyes turned to the pastor as he continued, his words heavy with remorse. I have failed you all. In my weakness and fear, I allowed myself to be swayed by the promise of easy money from the railroad. I compromised my principles and betrayed your trust. He paused, swallowing hard. I ask for your forgiveness, though I know I don't deserve it. From this day forward, I pledge to raise the funds for our new church roof honestly and without any strings attached. No more railroad money, no more compromises. A long moment of silence followed his words. Then, from the back of the church, a voice called out, We forgive you, Pastor. Others murmured their agreement, and Fitch's shoulders sagged with relief. Judge Hollister nodded approvingly, then turned his attention to Silas Bell. The railroad agent sat stiffly in his seat, his face a mask of barely contained fury. Mr. Bell, the judge said sternly, let this serve as a warning. Any further attempts to manipulate or circumvent the law in pursuit of Willow Spring will be met with the full force of this court. Do I make myself clear? Bell's jaw clenched, but he managed a curt nod. Perfectly clear, Your Honor. As the judge brought down his gavel to officially close the proceedings, Bell stood abruptly and strode out of the church. Through the windows, the congregation watched in silence as he made his way to the train station, his stiff-backed figure eventually disappearing into the gathering dusk. With the formal business concluded, the mood in the church lightened. People began to move about, talking in small groups, their voices a mix of relief and excitement. Some started the task of stacking the benches that had been brought in for the hearing, while others tended to the large stove that had kept the chill at bay throughout the long day. Mercy found herself helping Mrs. Greeley fold hymn sheets, her mind whirling with all that had transpired. She glanced around the room, taking in the sight of townsfolk and Ute working side by side, their shared purpose evident in every gesture and smile. As the last of the benches were put away and the stove banked for the night, Mercy felt a presence at her elbow. She turned to find Elias standing there, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. Reckon we ought to step outside for a spell, he said quietly. Got some things to discuss. Mercy nodded, following him out onto the church steps. The night air was crisp and clean, the sky above them a dazzling canopy of stars. For a moment, they stood in companionable silence, breathing in the peace that seemed to have settled over 3 cedars. Finally, Elias spoke. That line shack of mine needs rebuilding, he said, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. Was thinking maybe we could meet tomorrow, talk about how to go about it. Mercy felt a warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the lingering heat from the church stove. I'd like that, she replied softly. After breakfast? Elias nodded, the barest hint of a smile touching his lips. After breakfast, he agreed. As they stood there, the last echoes of the day's events settling around them, Mercy realized that something fundamental had shifted. The Water Trust wasn't just a legal solution. It was a bridge, connecting communities, healing old wounds and opening up new possibilities. And as for her and Elias, well, that was a story just beginning to unfold, as vast and full of promise as the star-studded sky above them. The crisp morning air nipped at Mercy's cheeks as she tightened the cinch on her saddle. Beside her, Elias did the same, his movements efficient and practiced. Jamie bounced on his toes, eager to be off, while two townsmen, Mr. Jacobs and Mr. Tanner, checked their tools and supplies one last time. "Reckon we're ready," Elias said, his voice low but clear in the early quiet. With a nod, Mercy swung into her saddle, and the small party set off toward Elias's burned-out line shack. The horse's hooves crunched on the frosty ground, a steady rhythm that matched the beating of Mercy's heart. She couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. This ride wasn't just about salvaging what they could, but about rebuilding something stronger. As they approached the charred remains of the shack, the acrid smell of smoke still hung in the air. Mercy's heart ached at the sight, knowing how much the simple structure had meant to Elias. But there was no time for dwelling on the past. They had work to do. "Jamie, you and Mr. Jacobs start checking for any tools that might have survived," Elias directed. "Mercy, if you could help me with the door frame, might be some good hardware there." They worked steadily through the morning, sifting through the ashes and debris. To everyone's relief, they managed to recover more than expected. A set of sturdy hinges, blackened but still usable, a cast-iron skillet that had somehow weathered the flames, and several unburned boards from what had once been the roof. "Look here," Mr. Tanner called out, holding up a soot-covered object. "Reckon this might clean up nice." It was a small wooden box, its lid charred but intact. Elias took it gently, a flicker of emotion crossing his weathered face. "Much obliged," he said softly. Mercy knew without asking that it must hold something precious from his past. By midday, the sun had climbed high, and the horses were showing signs of fatigue from the slow, careful work. "Best we stop and rest a spell," Elias suggested. "No sense in pushing the animals too hard." As they settled in for a brief camp, Elias beckoned Jamie over. "Come on, boy. Time you learned something useful." Jamie hurried to his side, eyes bright with curiosity. Elias pointed to the ground where a thin crust of snow remained in the shadows. "See how that crust formed? That tells you it froze overnight. Knowing how to read snow can save your life out here." Mercy watched as Jamie absorbed every word, his face screwed up in concentration. It warmed her heart to see Elias passing on his knowledge, building a bridge between generations and cultures. They arrived back in Three Cedars as the afternoon light was beginning to fade. Word of their expedition had spread, and a small crowd had gathered to help unload their meager but precious salvage. Mrs. Greeley bustled up, her face alight with purpose. "We've been talking," she announced, "and we've come up with a plan." She outlined the joint fundraiser: Ute baskets, pies, quilts, and a hymn sing, all to take place the following Saturday. "Proceeds will go to both the church roof and rebuilding Elias's shack," she finished proudly. Pastor Fitch, standing nearby, nodded solemnly. "I've posted a notice," he added. "Every donation will be recorded for all to see. No more secrets, no more shame." As the town lamps were lit, casting a warm glow over the bustling street, Mercy found herself sitting with Auntie Safina, planning the program order for the fundraiser. "We'll start with the drum circle," Safina suggested, her eyes twinkling. "Then move to hymns and finish with the auction." Mercy nodded, understanding the importance of balance. "That way, neither tradition overshadows the other," she agreed. "It's a new beginning for all of us." As they worked, Mercy couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. This wasn't just about rebuilding a shack or fixing a roof. It was about rebuilding trust, weaving together the threads of two communities into something stronger and more beautiful than either had been alone. The Saturday morning sun cast a warm glow over Three Cedars as the town square came alive with activity. Tables groaned under the weight of fry bread, golden-crusted apple pies, intricately woven baskets, and colorful knitted scarves. The air buzzed with excitement and the mingled scents of fresh baking and pine. Mrs. Avery, the schoolmarm, sat primly at a small desk, her ledger open before her, her pencil scratched steadily as she recorded each transaction with meticulous care. "Every penny accounted for," she murmured, adjusting her spectacles. Near the edge of the square, the agency clerk from Fort Garland, now off duty and dressed in civilian clothes, admired a finely woven Ute basket. My captain's wife would surely appreciate this craftsmanship, he said, fishing coins from his pocket. Auntie Safina nodded approvingly as she wrapped the basket in brown paper. Pastor Fitch had taken up position by a weathered nail keg, measuring out roofing nails and passing them to eager buyers. At cost, friends, he reminded each customer, his eyes clear and stance proud. We're all in this together now. Mercy's small apothecary table stood near the center of the bustle. She ground herbs with a mortar and pestle, the earthy scent mingling with the market's aromas. A ranch hand approached, cradling his arm gingerly. Let's have a look, Mercy said kindly, examining the swollen wrist. With deft fingers, she applied a soothing salve and wrapped the sprain snugly. Rest it for a day or two, she advised, and no roping for a week, you hear. As the sun climbed higher, the mood of the gathering shifted. The clear notes of a hymn rose from near the church steps, soon joined by the steady rhythm of hand drums from the Ute camp. The two melodies intertwined, creating a new harmony that spoke of shared purpose and hope. Children's laughter rang out from the direction of the acequia. Jamie led a group of young ones, showing them how to float little bark boats down the gentle current. Elias watched from nearby, a rare smile softening his weathered features. In the afternoon, a man Mercy recognized as one who had jeered at her days before approached her table. He twisted his hat in his hands, eyes downcast. Miss Mercy, he began hesitantly, I aim to apologize for my unkind words. I was wrong and, well, I'd like to make it right. He gestured to the cast-iron skillet salvaged from Elias's shack. I'd like to place a bid on that there pan, if I may, for more than it's worth, mind you, as a way of making amends. Mercy's heart swelled with unexpected emotion. That's mighty kind of you, she said softly. I reckon we all have some making up to do. As evening approached, Mrs. Avery stood to make an announcement. Friends, she called out, her voice carrying across the square. I'm pleased to report that we've not only met our goal for the church roof fund, but exceeded it. A cheer went up from the crowd. And, she continued, we have the Ladies' Aid Society and our Ute neighbors to thank in equal measure. Let's show our appreciation. The applause that followed was thunderous, with townsfolk and Ute alike sharing proud smiles and hearty handshakes. As darkness fell and lanterns were extinguished one by one, volunteers gathered to store the newly purchased lumber in the churchyard. Mercy and Elias found themselves standing apart from the others, gazing up at the star-filled sky. Quite a day, Elias said quietly. Mercy nodded. It surely was. I never thought I'd see such a coming together. Elias turned to face her, his expression serious but gentle. Mercy, I was wondering, would you ride with me to the promised stone ridge at sunrise? To give thanks, before we talk about what might come next. Mercy's heart quickened. She knew he meant more than just rebuilding the shack. I'd be honored, Elias, she replied. We'll ride at first light. As they parted ways for the night, both felt a sense of possibility, of a future brighter than either had dared to hope for just days before. The town had taken its first steps toward true reconciliation, enacted through shared labor and open-hearted generosity. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The sun peeked over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold, as Mercy and Elias set out towards the promised stone ridge. They rode side by side, leading their well-rested horses at a gentle pace. The morning air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and sage. As they approached the cairn atop the ridge, they spotted two familiar figures waiting for them. Auntie Safina stood tall and dignified, her silver hair catching the early light. Beside her, young Jamie shifted from foot to foot, eager but respectful. Elias dismounted first, offering a hand to help Mercy down. They approached the cairn with reverence, nodding in greeting to Auntie Safina and Jamie. Auntie Safina raised her hands, palms up to the sky, and began to speak in a clear, strong voice. Great Spirit, she intoned, we give thanks for the water that sustains all life. Bless this spring that it may continue to serve all who depend on it, two-legged, four-legged, winged, and rooted alike. She paused, her gaze sweeping over the small gathering. "And we ask for blessing on hearts that choose mercy over violence, understanding over hatred. May the path of peace always be illuminated for those who seek it." A respectful silence fell over the group as Auntie Safina's words settled into their hearts. Then, Elias stepped forward, a smooth river stone in his hand. With gentle care, he placed it atop the cairn. "For Alawa," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion, "may her spirit find peace in these waters she loved." Mercy followed, unfolding a small piece of paper. "It's a verse from my favorite hymn," she explained, tucking it securely between two stones. "There is a fountain filled with blood, drawn from Emmanuel's veins, and sinners plunged beneath that flood lose all their guilty stains." She stepped back, her eyes meeting Elias's with shared understanding. Jamie produced a small pouch of jerky, while Auntie Safina poured steaming coffee from a battered tin pot. They shared the simple meal in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts as they gazed out over the land that had brought them together. As the sun climbed higher, they began their careful descent. Elias and Mercy's single-action Colts remained holstered at their hips, a quiet reminder of the peace they had worked so hard to achieve. They reached Three Cedars by mid-afternoon, the town bustling with its usual Sunday activity. Their first stop was Mercy's clinic, where a miner with persistent headaches awaited relief. Mercy efficiently prepared a packet of willow bark, explaining its use to the grateful patient. As they stepped back onto the street, Elias cleared his throat. "Mercy," he said, his voice low and earnest, "I'd like to speak with Pastor Fitch, if you don't mind waiting a moment." Mercy nodded, curiosity sparking in her eyes. She watched as Elias approached the pastor who was just leaving the church. Their conversation was brief but intense, with Pastor Fitch nodding seriously and clasping Elias's shoulder. When Elias returned, there was a new determination in his step. The pastor advised patience and public honor in matters of courtship, he explained, a faint blush coloring his weathered cheeks. Mercy's heart quickened at his words, but she kept her composure as they walked towards her home. The afternoon light was fading as they reached her door. Elias turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. "Mercy," he said solemnly, "I'd like to speak before both the church and camp elders this evening, under the cottonwoods. With your permission, of course." Mercy's breath caught in her throat. She knew the significance of such a public declaration. "Yes, Elias," she replied softly. "I'd be honored." As Elias tipped his hat and turned to leave, the air seemed charged with possibility. The blessing at the promised stone had transformed grief into gratitude, opening the way for a future neither had dared to imagine just days before. As the cottonwoods rustled in the evening breeze, Three Cedars stood on the cusp of a new chapter, one built on understanding, respect, and the enduring power of mercy. The cottonwoods swayed gently in the evening breeze, their leaves rustling a soft melody that blended with the gentle murmur of the acequia. Lanterns hung from low branches, casting a warm glow over the gathering by Willow Spring. The air was filled with the rich aroma of stew, beans, and freshly baked fry bread, mingling with the sweet scent of apple and berry pies. Townsfolk and Ute families sat side by side on blankets spread across the ground, sharing in a Thanksgiving meal that celebrated more than just good food. It was a testament to the peace and understanding they had forged together. Judge Hollister stood, clearing his throat to gain everyone's attention. In his hands, he held the newly drafted Water Trust Charter. As the conversations hushed, he began to read aloud, his voice clear and steady. "This charter establishes a co-stewardship between the Acequia Association and the Ute Winter Camp, represented by Auntie Safina's band," he proclaimed. "A rotating board will oversee fair water usage, with enforcement resting with this court." Mrs. Avery, the schoolmarm, sat nearby with a ledger open on her lap, diligently recording the minutes of this historic occasion. Her pen scratched across the paper, preserving each word for future generations. As the judge finished reading, a respectful silence fell over the gathering. Then, Elias Crow stood up, his weathered hat clutched in his hands. He cleared his throat, his eyes seeking out mercy in the crowd. "With the blessing of both communities," Elias began, his voice steady despite the nerves evident in his stance. "I'd like to ask permission to court Mercy June Abernathy, slowly and properly, as befits a lady of her character." A ripple of excitement passed through the crowd. Auntie Safina was the first to respond, her lined face softening with a smile. "You have shown great respect for our ways and our people, Elias Crow. You have my blessing." Pastor Fitch stood next, nodding solemnly. "And you have the blessing of the church, Elias. May your courtship be guided by faith and mutual respect." A moment of silence followed, broken by Mrs. Greeley's teasing voice. "Well, Mr. Crow, I hear tell you haven't kissed a woman in 15 years. Reckon you remember how—" Laughter erupted from the gathering, easing any remaining tension. Elias's cheeks reddened slightly, but a smile tugged at his lips. He turned to Mercy, who had risen to stand beside him. With deliberate gentleness, he took her hand in his and raised it to his lips, placing a soft, grateful kiss upon it. The gesture, so simple yet so meaningful, brought a collective sigh from the onlookers. Mercy's eyes shone with emotion as she looked up at Elias, a promise of shared tomorrows passing silently between them. Nearby, young Jamie stood proudly, his chest puffed out to display his new Water Rider sash. His grin was wide enough to split his face as he watched Elias and Mercy, two people who had shown him kindness and trust when he needed it most. The agency clerk, who had been observing the proceedings with keen interest, leaned over to Pastor Fitch. "I'll be filing a report praising this cooperation," he said quietly. "It's rare to see conflict resolved so peacefully. You should all be proud." As the evening drew to a close, families began to douse the lanterns and pack up their belongings. Wagons creaked as they were loaded, and goodbyes were called out across the gathering. The sound of steady water running in the acequia provided a soothing backdrop to the scene. Mercy and Elias found themselves walking along the bank of the spring, their steps slow and measured. Above them, the sky was a canvas of stars, each one a point of light in the vast darkness. The future stretched out before them as wide and promising as the land itself. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.